Okay, so this is the beginning of lecture video number 2 on the 1928 election. So we'll pick up where we just ended. Well, Hoover needs an opponent. Though he'll be heavily favored as the conservative Republican running, the Democrats have to decide who are we going to nominate. In both 1920 and 24, the Democrats struck out with their nominees. Transitioning out of that progressive era and realizing that much of the Democrat Party's northern base is still progressive, meaning liberal, but their southern base is less so. They had more or less compromise candidates in 1920 and 24 who didn't please anyone. In 1928, the Democrats make a pivotal choice in their nominee, and one that in some ways is going to shape the future of that party, just as the Republicans are making the choice to embrace conservatism after the progressive era. The Democrats make the decision in 1928 they're going to embrace the more liberal progressive movement. And their nominee for president is going to be a very progressive candidate, a man by the name of Al Smith. If you go on to the Al Smith slide, number 6, you might want to find a picture, too. Find a picture of Hoover, find a picture of Al Smith, so he's helpful, since I'm not here to project for you. Al Smith, in so many ways, is the great epitome of now a full shift in the Democrat Party, where more liberal Americans, often labor workers, union members, urban dwellers, are going to embrace this party, the Democrat Party, whereas the Republican Party is moving more solidly in the conservative rightward direction. Well, Al Smith is a fast-talking, New York accented governor of the state of New York who is from New York City. And all you got to do is listen to him speak one time and you'll know it. He's in his 4th term as governor of New York, so he's very popular. He is a progressive Democrat and quite progressive in his politics. He's also a product of Tammany Hall, boss politics. And though most wouldn't say he's corrupt, he knows how to play the game of politics quite well. As governor of New York, he has instituted perhaps the most liberal or progressive agenda of any governor in any of the 48 states at this point. For example, recently in this time during his governorship, he got through the New York State Legislature a bill that he signed into law to provide state-funded, by the state of New York, welfare programs to those who are poor, where the government's going to be giving you money to help compensate for your poverty. This had never been done before in America. New York is the first state to try such. Now, obviously, a Herbert Hoover, a rugged individualist, would strongly protest this type of move, would say it's wrong, it's not the purpose of government. So we're going to have a clear disagreement here. On the one hand, you have a Hoover who's rugged individualism, small government, low taxes, keep out of the way. Whereas you have an Al Smith who still embraces many of the old progressive policies of trust busting, being more regulatory in policy, and big government liberal philosophies, like in this case, extremely big government, giving welfare to those who are poor in the state of New York. There's something else about Smith. As I said, he's kind of a fast-talking New Yorker. His name is not originally Al Smith. In fact, his name is very ethnic, changed when his family came to America. Smith embodies that new America, that melting pot demographic that we have. He's part Italian. He's part Irish. He has German blood in him. He's not that Anglo traditional, like we talked about with Hoover, going back to the days of the colonies, American. Al Smith is also Roman Catholic. Now, understand this. From George Washington to Calvin Coolidge, we have never had a Roman Catholic president. Every president of the United States to this point, from the 1780s to the 1920s, had been Protestant, some denomination of Protestant. In fact, we had never even had a major party candidate for president who wasn't Protestant. We're talking the Democrat Republicans, the Federalists, the Whigs, the Democrats, the Republicans, not one until Al Smith. Well, that's going to be an issue. Not so much Hoover's going to raise that issue, but it's going to be an issue. Before we go there, look at slide 7. Smith very clearly represented urban values, whereas Hoover was more a representation of the rural life. Smith wanted to repeal prohibition. He called for a constitutional amendment that would forever end prohibition. He thought it was senseless, caused more crime. Al Smith is also somebody who a lot of the non-ethnic, non-immigrant tradition Americans look at and say, he's different from us. And in a time where there's so many divisions, that may not be an asset to him. Go to slide 8. The Catholic part is particularly important. In the Northeast, there's a significant number of Roman Catholics. So in New York, places like Pennsylvania, Massachusetts. But outside of the Northeast, and certainly the further south and west you get, the number of those who are Roman Catholic significantly declines. And that's where you often get the greatest levels of distrust, bigotry, prejudice, directed toward non-Protestants. Again, Hoover and the Republican Party really don't directly raise these issues. These issues just make their way through society. People say, well, would a Catholic president align with the Pope? Members of the Ku Klux Klan, we know, are anti-Catholic, which is very powerful at this time, upwards of 5 million members. Well, if you look at the results of 1928, understand Hoover was going to win no matter who Al Smith was. This race was structurally built for him in a time of roaring 20s. The Republican candidate was going to win. But Al Smith's background, I think it's fair to say, probably doesn't help him. If you look at the Dave Leap site, which I encourage you to do, it's a blowout. Hoover wins 40 out of 48 states. That's a lot. That's a whole lot. And as he wins 40 out of 48 states, you can see if that leads to a 444 to 87 electoral victory, blowout of the popular vote, 58% to just 40% or 41% for Smith. But even, what's most intriguing about this election is even in the South, Herbert Hoover, a Republican, actually wins states. Hoover, a Republican, the party of Lincoln, and don't think people didn't think of it that way still in the 1920s in the South. Hoover wins Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, Florida, Texas. That's 5 states of the former Confederacy. That was unheard of in all the elections, really since the end of Reconstruction. The Democrats may not win elsewhere, but they dominate the South. But in this election, a Republican split the South. Won 5 states of the former Confederacy, lost 6. I mean, my gosh, if a Republican's winning there, they may be unstoppable. It's not that many Southern white voters had changed the Republican Party at this point. Not the case at all. But this is where if you look at the region of the country that perhaps might be the most anti-Catholic, perhaps be the most concerned about a person with immigrant background, it might be the South. And those concerns might have influenced this race and made many a Southern white Democrat actually put the X in the box for the Republican, which for them is not something they would normally ever do in this era. Anyway, Hoover wins big, and we will not see a Roman Catholic candidate for president again for 32 more years, when finally that sentiment might be put to rest some. Herbert Hoover is going to be the president, though. If you look on the final slide, slide 10, you can see that not only did Hoover win, but he had coattails for his party. The Republicans, who already controlled Congress, gain even more seats. They gain 32 seats in the House for a 270 to 164 big Republican majority. They gain 8 Senate seats for a very large Senate majority. Here's the reality. Some Democrats are going to start to wonder, are we ever going to win again? Other than Woodrow Wilson, who won twice, neither time with 50% or more of the popular vote, one time just because the Republicans did themselves in. Democrats are wondering, are we structurally ever going to be in a position where we could win the presidency consistently or control Congress? Because frankly, ever since the 1850s, the Republicans have kind of dominated. But be careful with that fear. As you're going to see as the rest of the century goes on, even into this day today, when one party's down in the dumps, never underestimate the party in power of making mistakes, or not making enough mistakes to the point where the party that's down in the dumps might make a comeback. And that probably is going to happen here if you're thinking about what might happen during the Hoover years. Nevertheless, at this point in 1928, and by his March 4th inaugural, the Republicans look on top of the world. When Hoover is sworn in as president on March 4th, 1929, he tells the American people, poverty in America is over, in his inaugural speech. Poverty in America is over. And he meant it. And he had good reason to think that was real and true. Unfortunately, Hoover's presidency is going to have like a good first 6 months. And then we're going to come to find, through events largely beyond his control, he's not going to necessarily be the right man with the right ideas to lead a country where the roaring 20s, which we thought were going to become the roaring 30s, fails to materialize. We'll talk about why and how that all is tomorrow. But for now, we're going to sign off. So you've written your note to a friend, you've watched this video, and now as you look at the remainder of the day, or at least the remainder of the time that you have left in here, I know you have those Roaring 20s projects that you were working on yesterday on the asynchronous day of learning at home. So in the remaining time, you could go back and work on those. You also have a little bit of reading you could work on, your research papers. So use the time that remains well and wisely, and have a great rest of your day. You'll see another video from me tomorrow.